This is another archival upload of some of my previous mix critique videos. I apologize for the vertical format that this video is about to switch to. This is 306 to 310. This mix was sent in by Lathe. It sounds pretty good so far. I think you need to work on the balance of the individual elements of the drum set as well as where they sit in relation to everything else, because the relationship of the guitar and the bass right now sounds really, really good. But as far as the drums go, the kick sounds like it's too far over the top of everything. The snare sounds like it's too far in the back of everything. Even the cymbals I feel like could probably come up a little bit. So it seems like mostly a balance thing. I'm not sure what order you're mixing things in, but I usually find things work out better if you do a balance of the drum set first and then you bring in the bass and the guitar and all the other elements of the mix. Because if you started with the guitar or the bass here, then it's going to be a lot harder to find the right spot for all the drum elements. I think if you get all the drum elements working well together first and then add everything else in, that it goes a lot better. Yeah, man, that's really the main problem, is the balance. It also just kind of feels a little sterile, and I think that's mostly a lack of mix bus compression. I think if you got the balance fixed and then added some mix bus compression, so it's just adding a little bit more movement to things, it would feel a lot better than it does now. The tones are good, the EQ is good, you did a good job on those things, but like I said, the balance is really off, and I think it just needs a little bit more movement from compression. This mix was sent in by Jonathan. I hate this drum sound in the intro. I'm sorry, man. Like, it's very clear that you EQ'd it and you were kind of going for like a telephone, megaphone filter type thing on it. I don't think you executed it really well. You kind of needed to do it to each individual part of the kit and not to the kit as a whole. And also the hi-hat is really harsh. It's really piercing. It's got some really nasty piercing frequencies in the high end that are cutting through above everything else right now. The synths sound okay, but there's a lot of low-end buildup. You definitely need to clean that up a little bit. It's a little overpowering. And the drum sound didn't change. I really expected the drum sound to change when everything else came in. I was hoping it would get a little bit better, but it didn't. So all you're left is with like some really nasty mid-range frequencies in the drums. Drums are about the only element that it's okay to take a lot of the mid-range out. Everything else, you need a full mid-range, but drums is a lot of low-end energy, a lot of high-end energy, and there's a lot of stuff in the middle that you can actually get rid of. But that's all you've left. Like, I can hear that nasty, like, 600 to 800 hertz in that kick. It's just, it sounds kind of basketball-y and gross, and it's just, I'm sorry, man, I just really don't like the drum sound. Yeah, man, honestly, overall, it sounds really amateur. I don't think this is even a mix thing. Like, you got to get the tones right to even be able to mix it well. And when the drums sound the way they do now, like, it's not working at all with the rest of the elements. It's instances like this that I really recommend people hire a good producer, because half of their job is getting you good tones that work well with each other. A good producer has a vision for the overall sound, and I'm sure you have a vision for the overall sound as well, but a producer can help you get the best version of that vision. He can help you find ways to execute that vision in ways that you probably don't have the experience to do. A good producer will have more experience finding good tones that work well for the genre and what you're trying to do, and more importantly than that, work well together. Because it's not enough to have a cool sound for each individual element of things. You need to have sounds that not only sound good, but also work well together. So remember, guys, I do a lot of production work. Like, if you're in this kind of boat that you're just having trouble getting sounds that sound good together, that's the kind of thing that I'm really good at, so think about reaching out. This mix was sent in by Mask Maker. Okay, so that sweep up in the intro was cool. The problem is it got really harsh. There was a lot of top end in the end of that, which honestly I probably would have just ignored, except for the fact that when it went into the actual track, the track itself is really, really dark. It seems like it's missing a lot of top end information, especially compared to that intro. So the comparison of the two, of how top end heavy that intro was compared to the actual track, it felt like we lost a lot of energy when we go into the track. Like, the mix overall is definitely a little dark. You got to boost some top end a little bit more, or maybe boost some low end a little bit less. I'm not sure how much low end you boosted in the track, but it's definitely missing some of that top end attack. You also have some balance issues. The drums are definitely way too loud compared to everything else. I'm assuming that you probably weren't getting the drums to cut through things well enough, so you just turn them up too loud. Normally, I would say, use the faders first, but you kind of went too far with the faders here. You probably need to bring those down and EQ them so they cut through everything a little bit better. Also, the guitars being too quiet compared to the drums might also be where you're missing some of that top end in the overall track. This mix was sent in by Ember Hill. The guitar in the background has too much top end. It's really piercing in the upper mids, like it hurts. And then the vocals just make things really muddy. You definitely have way too much low mids going on in the vocals here. It's probably partially the vocal itself, but also the time effects you've added to the vocal. People don't seem to ever EQ their time effects, which you really need to do. Reverbs and delays will really quickly add a lot of unnecessary mud to your track.
I still believe that we're better than...
Yeah, man, overall, there's way too much low end going on in this track overall. Like the bass, the kick drum, even the guitars, and the vocals and the time effects. Like pretty much everything below like 300 is way too high compared to everything else. So you're getting a lot of this like really washy low end below 300, and then it feels like it's just missing something huge in that like 300 to 500 hertz range. So really, it seems like you've probably over EQ'd things. Like you've definitely boosted way too much low end. You've cut a little too much out of that like 300 to 500 hertz as well. And honestly, a lot of these EQ moves are probably because you didn't spend enough time balancing first. Like if you balance the faders well enough in the beginning, you wouldn't have to make such drastic EQ moves, and you definitely wouldn't be having to add this much low end because everything would already be working together well.
No, don't you see? Now we're trapped in a chamber surrounded by echoes.
Also, the vocals are really pitchy. It's kind of killing it for me. Honestly, I would at least tune the vocals, if not retrack the vocals altogether, because the performance of the vocals isn't that great. But also just like, I don't know, man, the amount of EQ you've done already, there's probably not really any fixing that. You'll probably have to remix this from the ground up. You need to spend more time getting a good balance with the faders and then start to EQ. And if you have a good fader balance, you really won't have to do that much EQ at the beginning. If you have to do like ridiculous EQ after you're getting a good balance, that means that there's something wrong with the source tones to begin with. But really, to me, it just sounds like you tried to use EQ to fix things the balance would have fixed. And when you do that, you're going to automatically start to over EQ things and completely destroy the track. Like overall, it sounds like a pretty amateur mix. If I had to pick something that I liked about the track, it sounds like you have a pretty good handle on compression overall, but your balance in the EQ needs a lot of work. Remember guys, I do a lot of mixing. Like you can always hire me to mix a track. It really doesn't cost as much as people think it's going to. This mix was sent in by Grady.
I heard he hates me, sent you to tell me off. I think he bores you. Ellie, why'd you have to say that you want me?
All right, so I'm actually enjoying it so far. It's a well-written song. It's catchy. That's probably your saving grace here. Like I got all the way to the end of the first chorus before I stopped, and I figured like I probably could have kept listening to it. But the mix is okay. It needs some work in certain places. The first thing, I think you got some balance issues. I think the guitars could probably actually come up a little bit and the drums could actually come down a bit. So that would be the first thing, is just that little bit of balance. Overall, the EQ sounds pretty good, but it feels like, I think my biggest problem here is the guitar and the bass aren't really melding together the way they should. It feels like you probably cut a little too much of the low end out of the guitar and you don't have quite enough of the top end in the bass. Like they're good source tones, like I can tell they're good source tones. Overall, the EQ on everything is pretty solid, but that's really the biggest thing for me, is just the bass and the guitar aren't blending the way they should. And I think it's because you were trying to kind of carve out their own spot for each other rather than letting them work in tandem, which is really what you need to do in any track. Like the guitar and the bass should be working together. They have really similar frequency ranges. Like yes, obviously yes, the bass guitar is lower, but for the most part, they occupy a lot of the same parts of the frequency spectrum. And they generally have really similar parts, especially in this kind of music. So yeah, really overall, man, a little bit of balance issues, like you could work on that a little bit, but the biggest thing for me is you just got to make the guitar and the bass blend together. And really, I think that's mostly going to be a matter of not high passing the guitar so high and not low passing the bass as low as you did. Let them occupy the same space to some extent. Yeah, you should find, a couple frequencies for each to cut through the other one a little bit more, but you really need to let them blend together more than they are here.